Hi. So in this video, we're going to talk all about navigating your sexuality. It's a really important part of your recovery, but it's one that's maybe not paid as much attention. So we're going to talk about some of the ways that your sexuality may have been impacted by your experience. And as always, we're going to throw in a little bit of science to hopefully explain why you may experience some of the things you do. But really, if you were to get anything from this video, I'm hoping that after you've watched it, you might just feel a little bit more hopeful that you can and will be able to navigate your sexuality in a way that feels safer and hopefully a lot more fun as well. So when I talk about your sexuality, I don't just mean sex itself. So our sexuality is essentially everything that makes us sexual, and that might be how we engage with our sexuality, how we feel about our sexuality, how we express it. So maybe thinking about some of the ways that we dress, some of the places that we go, some of the things that we do, right through to sexual experiences themselves. And that can include self-pleasure, it can include dating, and partnered sex as well. And it's really important that we think about all of those aspects of sexuality because it's a really important part of what makes us human. And although we may all express our sexuality differently and we may all prioritize sex differently, we all have a right to a really fulfilling sex life. And so it's important that we know how to demand that, I guess, and how to facilitate that for ourselves. But it is completely understandable that your sexuality may have been impacted by your experience. It may have changed since your experience. And you may have felt like something really intimate has been taken from you. And that itself may have impacted you in various different ways. And although it might not feel like it right now, and although you may not be able to see this right now, you can reach a place where intimacy feels special again, where intimacy and sex feels safe, and it also feels pleasurable and fun. But it is also understandable that you may be experiencing a range of different emotions, experiences, and things that you maybe need to understand before we start to think about navigating that recovery. So there is no one way that a person's sexuality might be impacted. There isn't a typical way of responding. In fact, there are so many different ways that a person's sexuality could be impacted. And essentially, like any other trauma response, like any other triggers, they're unique to you and they're completely understandable. And they will have developed because of so many different things, because of your personal makeup, because of the specific things that have happened to you, and generally how you as a person cope with things. So this list is not exhaustive by any means, but these are some of the ways that you may notice your sexuality has been impacted. But it's also really important that you don't compare. So you may find that you speak to somebody who's had a similar experience to you, and they may be talking about things that feel like the complete opposite to how you feel. That doesn't mean there is anything wrong with the way you feel or the way that you respond. It just means that you're responding differently. So for example, some people may completely avoid sex. They may completely avoid not just sex itself, but anything in that area. They may change the way that they express themselves, the way they dress. They may no longer feel comfortable going to specific places or talking to people, flirting with people. They may just feel really unsafe in their sexuality and almost want to become invisible. Some people may find that they really want to exaggerate their sexuality. They may become quite hypersexual and sometimes even take quite risky sexual behaviours. And that's not something to judge. That's not something wrong that you're doing. In fact, I've spoken to a lot of people who have explained this type of behaviour as a way of trying to protect their sexuality. They almost describe wanting to deny the impacts of the trauma on their sexuality. It's something that they didn't want to be taken from them. So they threw themselves into sexual experiences as a way to try and prove that they could still enjoy sex. And that makes a lot of sense. And so essentially what I'm saying is, however your sexuality has been impacted, however you are currently navigating that sexuality, it's likely because of ongoing trauma response and developing protective coping strategies. But as we've talked about in some of our other videos, so we've thought about kind of developing coping mechanisms and thinking about some of our triggers, sometimes they can have adverse consequences. And our sexuality is no different. So we can experience a range of physical and emotional difficulties, whether that's because of a trauma response in itself or because we've developed some kind of strategy to try and protect ourselves from those difficult feelings. There are lots of ways that that can really impact us. So some physical ways that we can be impacted. There are so many different ways, but some really common things that are reported is painful sex, and not just during intercourse, but kind of any sexual experience. People can report experiencing a lot of sharp pains. They can experience kind of spasming, something called vaginismus, which is essentially where your muscles kind of contract, and it can be really, really painful. Some people can report feeling very dry or difficulty actually becoming aroused. And although there can be and there might be medical reasons why you're experiencing some of these symptoms, and it's always a good idea to speak to your GP about this, there isn't always a medical cause. And that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you or your body. It's probably simply a response to the trauma. And as we've talked about, your nervous system can become really dysregulated after experiencing trauma, and that can cause a lot of physical symptoms. But there are ways to help soothe that nervous system, to repair the dysregulation and hopefully reduce any unwanted physical symptoms. But as well as those physical symptoms, there is a range of really difficult emotional experiences. You may find yourself becoming really hypervigilant around sexuality, whether that's sexual experiences themselves, whether a friend has asked if you wanted to go on a date or a night out. You may find yourself in that permanent kind of survival state where you feel like you are constantly having to respond to threat. You may experience flashbacks or really intrusive thoughts, and generally just really overwhelming emotions before, during, or after sex. And some people report feeling lots of shame and guilt around their sexuality. A lot of people have told me that they actually feel shame if they do enjoy sex, because they feel like they should somehow not enjoy it anymore. And by enjoying it, does that mean that the trauma hasn't happened? Does it mean that there's something wrong with them? It can creep into those kind of self-blame cycles a lot as well. And other people report feeling really guilty that their sexuality has changed, and perhaps they feel like they're no longer fulfilling their role as a sexual person, or they may not be satisfying their partner in the way that they used to. And other people can continue to adopt those trauma responses. So if you've watched our Why Did I video, you'll remember that we talked about the 5 Fs. And if you haven't, we've put the link below this video. But essentially, we talked about some of the different responses when we feel threatened. And sex can trigger those responses. So you may find like you're still responding in a freeze zone or a fawn where you're overly focused on pleasing the other. You may have the fight or flight mechanism where you just feel the need to escape the sexual experience. And ultimately, all of these things are really common and really normal, but they are very difficult. But there are ways to navigate them. Like every other aspect of your recovery, starting to recognize some of the things that you're experiencing, some of the reasons why you're experiencing it, and some of your triggers, then you're already more empowered to start developing those coping resources. And it's really important that the message is that you can find pleasure again. This was actually the focus of my doctorate thesis. So I was exploring exactly this. So I was looking at female sexuality specifically, but how it's impacted after sexual violence. And out of all of the women that I spoke to, although there were challenges and although they did experience difficulties, they were all able to increase their confidence in expressing their sexuality. They improved their sexual communication, and ultimately they all found a way to navigate their sexuality in a way that felt safe and really pleasurable. And you can too. However, there is no pressure for you to do this. All healthy relationships and sexual experiences fundamentally start with being comfortable. So this has to be at the right pace for you. It's an important part of recovery, like all other aspects. But you'll know when you're ready, and you can start to explore this whenever you feel comfortable. But like I say, we can help you to do that. So we've created a range of tactic videos, and all of those tactic videos can be applied to your sexuality. They're not just for managing flashbacks or triggers relating to other aspects of your experience. They can all be applied to any anxiety you might feel about dating, anything that you may feel in your body when you're having sex, managing any intrusive thoughts during sex. They can all be used to help manage any difficult emotions or physical sensations that you experience when navigating your sexuality. And we're also going to talk a lot more about this topic on our community. So we've created a group, essentially, which is dedicated to all things sex. And you might want to join that group if you want to find out more about how to communicate about your sexual difficulties, how to set boundaries within your relationship, how to navigate dating, how to start to feel safe and confident in your body again, then please join that group. And also tell us more about what you would like to know. You might want to share some questions that you have, or you might want to share some tips on some of the things that you're currently doing to help improve your sexuality. And we've put a link to that community page below this video. But ultimately, the message is that you have a right to sexual pleasure. You have a right to feel comfortable in your own sexuality. And although you may feel like there are parts of this that have been taken from you, you can take them back, and we want to empower you to be able to do that. And so it is absolutely okay to ask for help. and to share with us anything that has already helped, so that we can create a really empowering group of individuals that want to have fun and they want to communicate their sexuality in a way that feels safe and positive and pleasurable.